Well, welcome. The bar is open, but we're down a bartender. So I know that we filed the proper documents for like all our workers. So we pay we pay health insurance and stuff, and one of our bartenders, I guess legally, when people are pregnant, they have to go on leave when they're close to giving birth. So we had to let April have the baby, take some time off, recoup, be a mother. I guess that's part of the being married and stuff. I guess that's part of the deal. So yeah,
we usually only like to talk about that sort of thing, but not practice it. But
right, yeah, it's much easier talking about it. And see, this is why we don't like practicing, because now it's weird. It's just Brian and I. Everybody that watches this show knows that April's the reason our conversations have any substance whatsoever. So it's going to be difficult. It's going to be difficult. Everyone pray for April and Emmanuel, her husband, as they go. She hasn't had the baby yet as of this recording, but it's very soon. So giving her some time to rest, and being with us is pretty hard mentally. So we'll give her a mental break as well. So it's gonna be Brian. We have some guests as also, like we might bring her brother back on if anyone's been watching the show long enough. Remember her brother come on.
But I'm trying to get Gavin to engage the federal headship argument because he did a video today or yesterday or whenever. Gavin Ortland.
Okay, yeah, I haven't watched it yet.
He did a video on not on the federal headship. He didn't engage that argument at all. He just engaged credo baptism thing or whatever.
Yeah.
Okay. And he said he's gonna read the comments this time. So I actually put down in the comments, hey, appreciate you willing to engage and all that, but ultimately you didn't engage what I think is the substantive argument, which is a general view of federal headship. Obviously, everyone believes in federal headship when it comes to Christ and Adam, but a general federal headship that's been lost, I think, by Credo Baptists. And so I'm hoping that maybe he's interested enough, and maybe we can bring him on and discuss it, or do a little debate back and forth, or something of that nature. But
well,
but he's probably too busy, and we're too small of a podcast to do that. So who knows?
I don't know. He's eccentric enough to be like, that's exactly the kind of podcast I would want to.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah,
maybe he's sick of these big,
But he probably is booked up for a very long time. Who knows if he'd ever have time to do it?
Well, Gavin, if you hit the link and you watch our video, that would be great. So, but that's not what we're talking about tonight. So it's gonna be Brian and I again. This new territory for both of us. I know you guys did without me. I am the least common denominator here. You don't need me. So the one that you did with Allison and April, that was good. I'm not sure if this one's going to be that quality, but we're going to try our best. So the bar's open. Come take a seat. I'm Drake. I'm a pastor at Trinity Reformed Church in Las Vegas. I have 4 kids, a few pets, big fish tank, and a AT-AT in the background.
You can barely see it, though. It's kind of in the dark.
Yeah, well, it's a Where's Waldo? It'll keep people busy.
My name is Brian Hodge, and I'm a pastor of Trinity Reformed Church in Las Vegas, fellow pastor with Drake, and I have a wife and 9 children. And I also have a fish tank, but not as big as Drake's. That's it.
That's it. All right.
That's all there is to me.
So how am I supposed to treat you now, Christian? Am I supposed to say like, well, no, mine's bigger and you should, be jealous about what I have? Tonight, we're going to talk about a few things, but we'll start with how are Christians to interact with one another. We see there's a lot of teaching on it. Obviously, like probably Matthew is both talking to pastors, but also talking to how do Jews treat Gentiles that are coming in the church? How do we treat those who are confessing allegiance to Christ? Those are coming in his name and saying, I am of this kingdom. How do citizens of the new heavens and new earth interact with one another? We do know that it can't look like the world because we are of a different creation. We are a new creation if we are regenerate. So there is a different way we interact. There's a different way we deal with sin and offenses, how we deal with our money, or stuff like that. But primarily, like, our relationships, do they need to look like the world? Meaning, like, do I need to find the Christians that I would get along with in the world and hang out with them, like, by themselves, or just only them? And I kind of give, like, I say hi to other Christians that I might not get, outside of Christ, not really spend time with. And do I just kind of leave them off to the side and just give them the brotherly wave or whatever it is? So, like, how do we interact as Christians together? That's kind of what we're going to talk about. I'll give it over to you.
Well, yeah, you know what's interesting is I think that most people in the church have it flipped. I think that they think it's okay for them to speak, I would say, in ways that are not honoring to one another, or harshly to one another, or whatever, not generous to one another. But then they want their pastors to speak that way to them. And in reality, their pastors probably need to speak more harshly than the average person does. Because frankly, most of the Bible is rebuke. Like, most of the Bible, it's God speaking harshly. Like, there are portions of the Bible that are more, maybe from a motherly perspective, more nurturing. But most of the Bible is the father nurturing. It's the way the father speaks to his kids when they're playing in the street and there's a semi rolling down it. Like, he's not gonna be like, hey boys, maybe you can get out, or I mean, obviously there are exceptions, but you have the woman who's more like, hey, come away now, let's come out of the street, whereas the father gets there and it's like, get your butts out of the street right now or I'm gonna make them red. Like, it's much more harsh. And that's the way a pastor would speak. But most people don't want their pastors to speak that way. They hate that out of their pastors. And yet, with one another, they'll speak very harshly when it comes to their personal preferences. And I just think they have it upside down. Your pastor should speak very directly. I wouldn't say always harshly, but very directly to you. And a lot of times that is going to sound harsh, or, it's going to be things that are offensive and whatnot. But on a personal level, in personal relationships, when it comes to preferences, you should actually do as the Bible says and give preference to the other, give honor to the other person. And regardless of whether you are being personally offended, you're turning the other cheek, you're letting that go. So you don't take upon the same role as the father, because you're not a father in the church, you're a brother and sister. And brothers and sisters talk to one another differently than fathers talk to their children.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I'm thinking of the idea of elder, right? Which many people think that's like a New Testament thing that wasn't true before. Like, there weren't elders before.
Yeah.
And now there's the church, and now we have like the presbyteros, right? But in fact, like, you go all the way back to Genesis, like, there's this idea of elder, right? And
Yeah.
you see elders positioned in cities at the gate, right? And the whole idea is, like, what are they doing at the gate? Not everyone's at the gate.
Right.
The people in the city are running their lives. Elders are at the gate, the ones that are chosen among the group, that are wise, that are faithful, right? That are not afraid of protecting people. So you have them outside the gate, seeing who's coming in, right? Are you safe to come into this town? Are you going to abuse our people? But once they cross in, there should be an idea like, oh, these people are okay. Like, not everyone's a gatekeeper. And because the church, like, everyone's either an aspiring elder or everyone takes this mantle of gatekeeper instead of the elders actually being the ones that are like you said, like, hey, should you be here? Or, like, don't go there. The ones that are actually speaking wisdom, it might be harsh, but protecting the town, essentially.
Yeah.
Everyone's got to do that. And then the elders don't do that. So everyone's like bickering in the town. The elders are sitting there like drinking beer, being like, oh, everyone just get along.
Yeah.
Like, it's so reversed. And biblically, that would destroy a town. Like, some group of bandits would come in and just wreck the town that way.
Well, and why are also the elders at the gate? Because it's a place of judgment where people are bringing their disputes.
Yeah.
And I feel like when people speak harshly to one another, offensively to one another over preferences, they're trying to solve their disputes themselves. They're actually like, well, I'm gonna be the judge of my dispute, and I'm going to judge this other person for offending me or whatever, and I'm gonna deal out my sentencing by calling them an idiot or maybe not that explicit, but basically demeaning them in some way, diminishing their humanity or whatever, which Christ speaks to, that even elders are not supposed to do. Right. With people. They're not supposed to personally attack people in the sense that they're trying to diminish their humanity, but rather to, if anything, diminish their ego in order to build them up in the end, not to destroy them and destroy their humanity. And so there's a lot of this, I think, just, again, individualism, to where people think, well, I'm going to, I don't need anybody. It's just me and this other person, and I'm going to deal with it by, getting into even more of a conflict and making it more heated and all that sort of thing.
Yeah, I know in our experience, we've seen this play out where, even those that are ordained in a different office, like a deacon or something like that, is instead of trying to make sure that the needs are met, to make sure that the weaker Christians, right, are not being judged by the stronger Christians about like what they eat, what they think is, the baggage they're bringing from their former life or something like that they are hopefully going to mature out of. Instead of doing that, it is like conform now or else.
Yeah.
Like conform now or you'll wind up in the camp of the liberals. Conform now or, this whole Christian life for you is going to be just a waste of time and you're just going to end up back where you were before. And it turned it into a rivalry and not a place of sanctification.
Yeah.
Like you said, like those in the church should not be ripping each other's humanity down. And again, like, what is this idea of humanity? Well, it is this connection to Christ, because Christ is the true human. So if you're ripping down people's humanity, you're actually ripping them away from Christ and saying like you're not in Christ. Yeah. If you actually are attacking their humanity, because there's a difference between attacking their sin, which is inhumane, but instead, like it is ripping away what is satanic, right, and then making them more human. Not the vice, but what that often turns into is actually diminishing their identity in Christ, and then they're confused. They're like, "Am I actually a Christian or not?" Because everything I do seems to be, the wrong thing. Apparently not what Christ is at all. And I thought I was unified to him. Apparently I'm not. And that's what like dehumanizing somebody does.
Well, and I think that like, I think most people, like if you said, hey, should you slander, people would be like, oh no, slander is wrong. But I think most people, like, they don't get the point you just made. Like they don't understand what slander is. So if you understand that the person, their humanity is their name, their reputation, and you murder their name, their reputation, you make it make their name a bad name to other people. That's what slander is. That their name becomes a negative name. Now, it's different if you yourself sin and are in unrepentant sin. You've made your name bad. No one else has done that. We've just called you out for making your name bad, for murdering yourself. Literally, this is why God keeps saying, like, yeah, you will absolutely put this person to death for their sin, and their blood is on whose hands? Yours? No, their blood's on their hands. They killed themselves by doing that sin. That's different. That's why we speak differently to someone who's in sin. And if you look at me, like whenever I would get angry with someone, and I'd be then slandered for it. It's like, oh, Brian can't control his temper and all that sort of thing. It's like, no, it was always someone who was sinning. It was always someone in rebellion against the church, someone who said they weren't going to repent or they weren't going to forgive, even though, the cross demands that we forgive. They're just flat out in defiance and rebellion, or someone who's like, oh, well, I threw out the church and I'm going to be with a family instead that I like. And I'm going to challenge the elders and I'm going to twist the elders and what they said and all that sort of. It's like, yeah, no, I'm going to get mad. That person's in sin. They're actually ruining their own name and they're ruining the name of other people. And so they're going to be called out for it. But that's very different than someone going around and making a bad name of a person who has not made their name bad. Mm-hmm. That's what slander is. Slander is making someone whose name is not tarnished and tarnishing their name, tarnishing their reputation, putting them in a negative light that they themselves have not put themselves into. And I think that's an important distinction, because you do call out people in sin. And we were accused of calling out people who are in sin as slandering them. That's not what slander is. Slander is you're throwing mud on a person who's clean. That's the difference.
Yeah, yeah. Pointing out somebody's sin is not, especially if it's a public sin. I was like, that is actually what Scripture calls to do.
Yeah,
now,
Paul says we're supposed to do it.
We're supposed to do it. Now, if it's a private sin, I would say deal with it privately. You don't need to make it public. That might be somebody angling to reduce somebody's humanity, improperly engaging with that. But the other thing that people don't realize too is if somebody's name isn't, if they haven't soiled their own name, and then you come next to them, literally putting the mud on their face, then that's actually demeaning the character of God. So similarly to like what we've been learning in Numbers, right? Where God says, come across the Jordan, and then Israel's like, oh, I guess God's a murderer now.
Yeah.
I guess God, he's not a God of life. He's just a God that likes to play. He plays with his toys, and then he's like a cat, right? And he kills it at the end.
Yeah.
And it's like, you think you're calling that person, right? You think you're demeaning that person, or you're trying to bring down that person, but ultimately that they're Christ and united to him. So really you're putting those attributes or those false attributes on Christ, and he's not going to stand for that.
Literally, so we're going into Deuteronomy now. The first chapter of Deuteronomy, Moses tells us why they rebelled. It's because they said God hates us.
Yeah.
So they literally have maligned God's character, who loved them, lied about his character, lied about who he is. And that's why they rebelled against him, because they had a false view of God, that he hated them. But they first had to actually destroy his name. His name he had built to show that, oh no, I love you. I've saved you from slavery. I brought you out with a mighty hand. I've cared for you, preserved you. I've made you a numerous people like I promised. I've done all these things to show you that I love you. And then you guys turn around and say that I hate you. You're liars. You slandered my name. And yeah, no, it really, I don't think people realize that they are saying something against Christ when they slander a brother. But slandering in general is just, it's why it's a type of murder, because you are literally diminishing the humanity of a person, their reputation. Think about if you live, we live in a bigger world, so maybe you can go somewhere else and no one knows who you are, and you can move, or you can, start a new YouTube channel and, grow a beard or shave your beard or whatever.
Have 50 different pseudonyms that you're or subsidized.
Right. Yeah. But imagine you being in like a small town where you're not going to move. Everybody knows you, and somebody decides they're just going to rip you apart. Like it's like when Bilbo gets back from the adventure, right? Like you think it's going to be this like, wow, you went on a great adventure and you did all these amazing things. Instead, everybody thinks he's a weirdo. So he's just a weirdo. He's got a bad reputation. A lot of people are probably angry that he took back some of his stuff that they bought at the sale when they're selling all this stuff or whatever. And you think like, what did this guy do to get this horrible reputation? Now he'll just always be known as weird, and people just don't really want to talk to him and all that sort of thing. That's what happens when you ruin someone. You murder them, even though they're alive. You murder them in terms of their persona in the community. And so it really is a wicked sin. And people will do this either behind the backs of other Christians, or they'll do it to their faces, and many times even in front of audiences. Think of how many people are listening in and looking on when you have a conversation on Facebook. And you get into like a theological dispute or something, or an ethical dispute or whatever. Now, I would say as a pastor, I do speak harshly to people in a way that if I was not a pastor, I would not. So I feel I have a responsibility to act as a father in the situation more than a brother or something half the time. But I do think people don't realize that when they get in these conversations, they really, they need to be more careful about how they're talking to one another than they do about even winning the argument. And I think we've made this comment before, to where, like, when I'm with my kids, one of the big lessons that I had to learn, and frankly I'm still learning, but when you do a project with your kids, it's not about the project. It's really about you building a relationship with the kids, and it's you showing them the character of God in it. and knowing that, it's just like, oh man, I think of all the times that I've failed to actually do that, because you get upset, you get angry, your kids aren't listening, the project's not going well, it's falling apart, or all this stuff. And you get it, and you think it's about the project. Well, in the same way, on the Facebook conversations, or any theological or ethical conversation, it's not really about winning the argument. At least not always. Sometimes it needs to be, but not always. It's more about actually whether or not you reflect Christ in your conversation, and maybe it's more about your own sanctification in terms of how you're speaking to another brother in Christ, more than what you're talking about.
Yeah, there's this I think there's this idea, like, people will say, well, of course I want to be like Christ in my conversations, and Christ was like the best entrapment guy that's ever walked the face of the earth.
Yeah.
He can entrap you in an argument before you even finish your sentence. And the Bible says to be as cunning or as wise as serpents, as gentle as doves. I just want to be wise like a serpent. I want to be wily. I want to trap you. I want to win, because that's what literally Christ has done, right? I want to say, like, okay, the purpose of Christ entrapping these Pharisees, right? These supposed leaders, right? The ones that are actually saying they had the same authority as Christ, or even higher than him, was actually leading people to hell. So the whole point is, like, I need to take the yoke of the people off of you and put them on me, because you're killing them. There's a purpose of him entrapping them, not to show that he is probably the best debater, tactician, rhetorician that probably has existed, but it's to prove the point that their leadership is like they're murdering people with their teaching, and he is.
Well, yeah, I think we should ask, like, is Christ? I think you indicated this, but is Christ speaking to the Pharisees for the Pharisees, or is he speaking for the crowds?
Right.
And I think he's speaking to let the crowds know these guys don't speak for God.
Exactly.
These guys are actually, they have led you to hell. If you follow them and you do what they're doing, you adopt their religion. Yeah, they're very pious people. They're all going to hell. Like, don't follow them. Like, listen to what they say. If they teach you the Bible, that's great, as long as they're teaching the Bible. But anything else that they do, like, forget it. Don't do as they do. Don't pick up their religion. So I think he's speaking for the crowds more. And I think it's fine. I think when I say, like, you should show Christ in your conversation, sometimes that means you speak harshly, especially if I think you're a pastor or someone in a position of authority, or you may know something, and you've got some guy who thinks he knows a lot of stuff, even though he never studied anything. I mean, I think that you need to speak, against his ego there, and kind of dislodge the influence that he has over people. So I don't always mean, I fear that when people say speak like Christ, their view of Christ is that he's, the shepherd holding the little sheep and he's petting it. And,
well, that's the other end, right? That's like, right. Like, I won't speak anything bad about you at all. Right.
But Christ, even when he calls Peter Satan as an adversary, right, he's not trying to diminish Peter. He's trying to let Peter realize there's a demonic influence. There's a satanic influence in what you just said there, Peter.
Right.
You've allowed Satan to speak through you because you're not putting your mind on the things of God, but rather on what preserves the temporary life here.
Well, and that is literally the temptation Satan offered, right? Was not to die. Peter had no idea that he was quoting probably Satan at that moment.
Right. But like everything I think that Christ does, even though he speaks harshly to people, it's direct conversation that is out of love, rather than I think that you're worthless. Like, that's not, obviously he doesn't think they're worthless, because he's about to redeem all of them with his own life and his own blood. So even harsh speak, it can be out of love. I guess I'm really more talking about, it's clear to me that in a lot of conversations, people are personally offended.
Yeah.
And or they fear losing the argument. So the default of every fool, and we're all fools if we are trying to save the ego, and that's what people are trying to do. The default is to go into ad hominem fallacies and to start attacking the person rather than actually attacking the argument and not attacking the person.
Well, here's to that point. The irony would be like if someone is trying to publicly debate and want to win the argument, and they want to say, well, look how Christ debated the Pharisees and stuff like that. Ultimately, you can say Christ lost the argument in one sense because he didn't convince. They crucified him, so it's like they weren't convinced.
Yeah.
In the end, now theologically we understand why and stuff like that, but just as far as like was Christ concerned about winning the argument, and then when the Pharisees were like, we're going to crucify you, did he turn to ad hominem at that point? Well, no, because the very people that crucified him not much later after Pentecost are going to repent and actually join the church. So like even in that, like Christ is saying, the argument is life, and life will win in the end. So like there's not a personal I don't need to hold on to my personal reputation. I can be humiliated on the cross because I have a God that's going to vindicate in the end anyway. And when we debate, like when we argue and debate, we need that the same mindset needs to be there. Like God will vindicate me. I'm not here to win an argument. I might not even be persuasive, but as long as I'm arguing in truth and in love, not saying it can be harsh at times, but in love still, and not trying to build up my reputation as like the steel man. I am the guy out there that can steel man anything.
Yeah.
And just worried about the end result, which is life. Then in the end, you'll win all the arguments because life wins in the end.
Well, yeah, I mean, isn't winning really, like, I think it's winning is two things when you're in an argument. One, you present an argument that's persuasive to anyone who is wise, who looks at it, and then there may be nobody who's wise in the moment who's going to see it. Maybe they'll see it later, or maybe whatever it may be. And maybe the person you're talking to will become wise and they'll get it later. Who knows? But the point is that you may not persuade them, but you've made a wise argument to where if anyone who's wise will listen, and you've exalted Christ in your character, and even if the other person doesn't think that you did, even because the other person maybe they don't even know Jesus, and they think, oh well, my Jesus would never speak that way, or my Jesus would, that sort of thing. But you've exalted Christ in terms of showing people who Jesus is truly, the real Jesus. Then you've won, even if the guy is not convinced, even if he goes out calling you names. I often will like jump out of I'll be like, I'm going to be done with the conversation because when it turns to ad hominem, because it's just sort of like, there's no point. I've made the argument. Anyone who looks at it can look at, whether or not, quote unquote, I've won the argument, but the other guy's never going to admit it because his ego's in it.
Yeah.
But the goal is to exalt Christ and exalt the truth, as you just said. That's when you win. You lose, even if you're right, when you just use a bunch of ad hominems and bad arguments. I actually think that the conversations we're getting in as Christians, a lot of Christians are, in effort to argue for what they think is true, are making themselves idiots. Yeah. Because they're training, and I think that's the real goal of the devil, to train Christians to be morons in how they think.
Sure.
Because even if you're right about a particular issue, that moronic way, that foolish, that illogical, emotional, ad hominem, whatever it is, logical fallacies that you're using will eventually lead you to a bigger wrong. And the devil knows that, and that's what he wants. He wants you to argue like an idiot. So it doesn't matter what team you're on, even if you're on the right team. It doesn't matter if you have the right view, and that's the truth, and it's backed up by all these people. It doesn't matter. The devil wants you to train yourself to be a fool. The book of Proverbs is not telling you all the wisdom in the world. It's a book that's trying to train you how to think about things, because that's what wisdom is. Train you how to be wise. The devil's trying to also teach you how to think, but that he wants you to think like a fool. And so his purpose is to get you in a million different conversations where you don't argue, using logic, using self-control, and thinking like Christ and wisdom. He wants you to start arguing like a fool. And most Christians, most evangelicals fall for it. And they do that.
So the public venue, the most public venue to see this is like Facebook or any public forum where you know X is probably the top of the list there. I get on X every once in a while, and if I'm on there for 5 minutes, I feel like I need to take a shower. Right? It's just like this. It's just disgusting.
I'm not even on it.
It is such a weird place, and there are good faithful Christian teachers on there that are trying to influence in a good way, but man, it's a tough place. Like seedy. It's like the back alley, of thought that you just don't want to be caught by yourself in. You get beat up real quick. But like even like in the local assemblies, I'm thinking of things like foods people eat or hobbies that people take up, like smoking or drinking, or someone might be really into how spirits are made, and they have a unique liquor cabinet, right? And they, that's what they enjoy. The next person might, I'm on the rice diet, or this other guy over here is like, well, okay, I'm on the carnivore diet. And it's like, all right, everyone has these different things they're bringing into this local assembly. None of these things are sin, right? None of it is, right? Some of them might be more unwise compared to the other, maybe. Just even like in a practical way, one might, I don't know, not be as healthy as something else,
right?
But how do we, if we're trying to present an argument in that environment, because that's usually where like the breakdown relationships happen. Those little things that Paul's like, look, meat, no meat. Those are, like you said, those are things that the devil is going to influence you to think about and argue like a fool, and then totally disintegrate a church. And how do we interact like that, and not interact like we can hang around together for a couple years until you move away, because that's what we do in America. But what if I was around you for the next 30, 40 years? And what if our children actually grow up together? How do we maintain a relationship then with these differences? I can't go over to your house every other fellowship meal and know that I'm going to have to choose between sweet potatoes and jasmine rice. Give me my hamburger. How do we interact as Christians that way?
Well, it does make sense then that like the transient nature of Christians, even if they live in the city, because they'll just go from church to church.
Yeah.
But that transient nature does probably feed into the fact that where like, oh, I don't need to build a relationship with you, so I don't mind burning the bridge. And it's like, man, again, if we all lived in a small town, you'd care a whole lot more about that bridge.
Yeah.
And maybe one aspect of your life that's really not under the lordship of Christ, because you're jumping church to church, is not making another aspect not be under the lordship, and you wonder how many other things then are affected by all these different things. But this is definitely one of them, to where people just don't care about burning bridges between Christians, and they don't realize the bridge I have between you as a Christian and me is the bridge I have between me and Christ. I don't want to be burning that bridge. Like, whatever you've done to the least of these brothers of mine,
right,
you've done to me. That is also, it's not just applied with giving people food. That means no matter what you treat another Christian like, you've treated Christ that way. And so if you treat them poorly, or you're going to be overly offended, I guarantee if the Lord Jesus was in front of you and you loved him, in no way would he do or say something that offended you that you wouldn't just let it go.
Right?
You absolutely would just let it go. You'd be like, well, you know what? He's probably in the right anyway.
Something I don't know.
Yeah, maybe I do, or whatever. But you would just let it go either way, no matter. You wouldn't even get offended in the first place, probably.
No.
And that's the way we need to be with one another. Like it needs to be water off a duck's back. Like, just let it go. People moralize their their preferences though. And that's the problem, is that like you can say, oh, well, sure, my preferences, no problem. But most of my preferences are connected to sin. And then you can see, and it's like, let's take the food thing for an example, right? So someone will be like, well, eating a ribeye is creational and healthy because it does good things for your body. It gives you the protein you need. It wipes out, it does the elimination thing, gets rid of the chemicals, which harming your body and which are anti-creational and therefore sin.
Mm-hmm.
And then I would come up to that person and be like, okay, let's say you were starving and had no food. Would a McDonald's cheeseburger be more creational than eating nothing? And of course, the answer would be, well, yeah, of course.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, okay, but even though it's harmful in a way, it's actually more helpful than harmful to the guy who's going to starve to death. And It's like, okay, yeah, sure. But really, he should eat the ribeye because it's healthier. It's like, okay, but the poor can't afford the ribeye. They can only afford the McDonald's cheeseburger. So what's more creational for the poor? Well, to eat the cheeseburger. And he can actually feed his family with it and all that. So in reality, he's not sinning.
Yeah.
But you're judging him based on a preference that has been afforded to you because you're rich, that you can afford ribeyes every night. You're judging him for eating poorly and being in sin when he's not. That's the problem with preferences, is that they're subjective to you. They're subjective to you and your experience and your household and your all of that. So they really are just preferences. They're not moralized. Maybe you're trying to make them, maybe it is moral for you in your situation, but it's not objectively moral, and which is why you should not be judging anyone else by it. But the problem is that people do this all the time by moralizing their preferences. Then they judge other Christians. They view them as lesser, and it comes out in the way they speak to other Christians. Because if you think someone's lesser, you're going to be dismissive of that person. You're going to speak to them poorly. You're going to just not care about what they have to say or whatever. But you're actually going to be a partial judge, which again, in Deuteronomy 1, as we're about to get into, is what the judges are exhorted to not be. You're not to be partial.
Looking back, just experientially, looking back to something that occurred, this was a couple of years ago, but in light of like different preferences that other like families had in regards to like raising their children, some people didn't like or weren't fans of how particular families were doing things. And, usually like it's the 1% that are really vocal, the ones that may speak harshly, like in public or something that you have to rebuke. But usually like most people aren't going to do it that way. They're going to disassociate.
Yeah.
Like the way they judge you is like, okay, I'm just not going to be around you.
Right.
And I remember that. I remember people telling me, I cannot be around that family because A, B, and C, like I don't like the way they do this. Their children are too loud. Da da da. And I'm like, and I remember thinking at the time, I was like, okay, that is a problem. A church can't continue that way. But any material organization couldn't. If I just couldn't be around my employer anymore, that work relationship's not going to work.
House divided against itself, right?
It's not going to work, right? So I remember thinking, like, okay, but we have time to fix this. I remember thinking that, like, okay, we can. And I remember telling this individual, I was like, that's insane. That is not going to sustain a actual relationship for long. If you are going to the church with this person, but you're not going to fellowship with them, you're not going to let your kids interact. Like, that's not good. And then years later, the fruit of that was disintegration, and it was over preferences, and it was not even bad speech to one another, right? It wasn't harsh or like ad hominem. It was quiet disassociation.
Well, it was probably bad speech in the background behind the backs of the people, but
I would say the speech that they told me was bad, right? Like, I don't want to be around them. Like, that's bad. Okay. But they weren't like, it wasn't, you wouldn't have known what they were saying.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. I think, and again, I think it goes back to the being partial bit, to where if you're partial, you will humanize the people you like over their sin and not judge them correctly. And you will dehumanize the innocent over their innocence and not judge them correctly. And so the innocent will be judged in a way very harshly, even though they don't deserve it, because you just don't like them. And the people you like should be judged for their sin, but won't be because you like them. And in reality, what it shows is that you're just a wicked person. You're unjust because you have favorites and non-favorites. You don't do what's right across the board for everyone. And this is true in how you then speak to people as well, or about people, or whether you disassociate or whatever, and it's behind the scenes and all that sort of thing. It all has to do with dehumanizing the people you don't like and over-humanizing the people that you do. And I would say you on the reverse side, you shouldn't speak more highly of a person than you ought to.
Yeah, like flattery or something.
Yeah, like in a flattering sense or any of that. Or even have that mindset toward them. Realize, like, everyone that I love in the church that I have a high opinion of, I know is a sinner. I'm not shocked. If they come to me tomorrow, I'm like, yeah, I'm in this horrible sin. It's been a secret over. I'll be like, I'm not going to be shocked by it. I'll be like, yeah, okay, well, let's try to deal with it because I love them and I'll try to deal with it. But I don't have such a high opinion. It's like, oh no, you could never do that. Not that person, which we got a lot of from, when we called out sin. Oh, that person would never do it. It's like, what do you mean they would never do it? Like, any human would do lots of things. I don't get it. Right. So not overly doing that, but then also not diminishing someone's humanity just because you don't personally like them. You're not buddies with them. Maybe you dislike their personality and their personality doesn't mesh with yours or whatever. It's real. Like we are just so tribal, based on our preferences, when we should be tribal based on who is the seed of the devil, who is the seed of God. Yeah. Those are the two tribes that God has created. So we should be tribal. Tribalism is always going to exist.
Not gonna go away. Yeah.
I mean, the guy who's like, well, I'm not going to be like them. I'm not going to be tribal. It's like you just created two tribes.
Exactly.
Guys. I mean, so it doesn't matter. There's always going to be tribal. It's a matter of whether or not your tribe is based on what God has said in his word and the tribe that he has set up versus the other tribe. And there's only one other tribe. Versus you making a bunch of different tribes from your own preferences as though you were God. Yeah. And you're going to set up your own religion for what the tribes are. And that's how we speak to people. We speak as though you're only in my tribe if I like you. And it's like, I'm sorry, then you're not a Christian, if that's true.
Well, and you wonder why you need elders that are able to shepherd, because the propensity of people are going to be tribal even in their own tribe. And like you said, we're all sinners and we're going to still gravitate that way until the shepherd smacks in the face with the staff. And you're like, okay, whoa, oh, yep. If anyone's ever watched like Cesar Millan, the dog whisperer, like one of the things he teaches, like, you have to snap the dog out of his like mental trance, whatever he's, if he's like in trance with food or whatever, you got to snap him out of it. Usually it's like with a little, mouth shape hand, snip at his rear end, and he like snaps out of it. And it's like, it is the same way for us. It is the elders. Yes, they're there to teach and reproof, but ultimately that reproofing is what you're doing. And scripture is what guides the shepherds to smack in the right spot. and I'm not going to nip at the dog when he's eating his food properly. It's when he's eating my daughter's food that I'm going to nip at him. So right. So it's like, that's why you need to actually listen to the shepherds that Christ has given you. Because if you don't, or if you have bad ones, if you put in tribal elders that are like you, your church is done for. But if you actually have good ones, you need to listen to them, because you will go that direction. You will get sick of the lady who medically has an issue with like certain perfumes, and it's an ongoing issue. You're going to get sick of that person eventually if you don't snap out of it, and you're going to be divisive, and you're going to be tribal, and you're going to hate that person over time. instead of being like, all right, this is a family, a family that still sins, but a family that has a cross that can repent and be washed for those, and not have any offenses attached to our backs. Like you said, they can roll off our backs. And just experientially in our church, when those things aren't properly dealt with by the elders, or when an elder joins one of the tribes, or
starts one,
it is it defames Christ's name.
Yeah,
as we were talking about at the beginning of this episode. So,
yeah. Well, I do think to take it back to all the conversations that we're having. I think that people have their egos bound up in their preferences, in their personal what they view or whatever as would be honor and dishonor that's given to me or whatever. So like one person might be like, well, if you honored me, you wouldn't like step in front of me or whatever it'd be, whatever.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. If you honored me, you wouldn't you wouldn't interrupt me or something. It's like some people just interrupt. It has nothing, like their world of preferences is not necessarily the same as your world of preferences. I realize there are manners and preferences that are cultural and all of that. It was funny going to China and being taught all these things by missionaries about how you should be like culturally sensitive and all that sort of thing. And then one of the missionaries that were with us that taught us this was really offended because in China, like if you go to McDonald's, it's not a straight line. It's just all the people pushing in.
Yeah.
And the missionary was like, "Excuse me, I was here first," and she got really offended. And I'm thinking, like,
that's
no,
just the way
this
it
is
is.
Clear the cultural thing.
Yeah.
So like their world is not necessarily yours. Maybe they're not meaning to dishonor you,
right?
But you've got that in your head because that's your preference and your manners and all that sort of thing and your culture. But even if they were, are you really tied so much to what someone says to you, or if someone negates an idea that you have? We have so much ego in our ideas, and it's sort of like I can change my mind on something, which shows that it's not me. I'm not my idea. Now hopefully if I believe the truth, it's changing me, but ultimately it's not me. So if it's not the truth, I can let it go. And if Christians just kind of say to themselves, the truth will win out, and the character of Christ will win out, and the honor of Christ will be given to me eventually anyway, I don't really need any sort of accolades right now. I don't really need anyone to honor me right now. And I don't need anyone to bow to my idea right now or any of that. Then ultimately, I don't get offended if you try to refute my idea. Yeah. My ego's not invested to where I start having to like win. It's just a matter of like, oh, okay, well, I can lose and maybe the truth will come out and I'll believe something greater and I'll be better for it. And my family will be better and the church will be better. And that's great. And if not, I'll defend the truth and maybe they'll be better or whatever. But your ego's not tied to it. And your ego's not tied to all these preferences because they're all changing and you can change your preferences, which again, show that they're not you. So they're not you. Your ideas are not you. No one's offending you by attacking an idea or by violating your preferences and your personal space and all that stuff or whatever it may be. No one's attacking you. And I think if Christians think that way about it, they'll be less offended and get into less conversations where they're attacking one another.
Well, thinking like in the literary mindset, what's a better story? Medieval, environment. You're in the castle. You're the king. You're sitting at your table. It's you're having dinner with all your whatever, your cabinet or whatever, all your knights of the round, right? And you got this guy that comes in and maybe offends you, right? He speaks out of turn or something. He's does something that's not appropriate to your court. Is it a better literary scene, or do you root for the king more, the one that like points the guy out, bind him up, kick him out of the castle, you're gone, or the king that like takes the offense and then over time wins the guy over, and then he becomes like the second-hand man, like one of the most loyal subjects to the king, right? Expanding his kingdom. It's like that's the king people would gravitate towards and want to be like, right? And it's funny because this kingdom idea, again, experientially in our church, was a big issue at one point. Like every man's house is his castle, and you can't, and it's true, you can't just come in a man's castle and demand they do things your way, right? That's their castle. You kind of you submit yourself to them. But we had people get offended by others who didn't mean to, but their personality is kind of like overbearing, and it looks like they're undermining the host. And we had hosts kick people out of their homes. I'll never forget this. And it was like, is this something that was even worth making the scene in the church to like kick somebody out of your house? Maybe it was, maybe it wasn't. But it is this idea like would it have been better to take the slap because maybe they thought that a host shouldn't have to entertain, that maybe it's everybody else's, it's the guest's job to keep everyone occupied while the host makes sure the food's still okay, so they don't have to do like 50 different things. And then maybe, get to the bottom of this privately and then win over somebody and be closer for it. Now, granted, they did get over it eventually, but it was this, like, you offended my ego idea. There wasn't this attempt to try and deal with this in a disarming way. And that would edify everyone, because now everyone's just like, well, I guess if somebody offends me in my house, I got to kick him out in this church. I was like, no, that's not how we do things. But anyway, so.
Yeah, I think it's just look, it's a matter of when Christ calls us, he says, look, you've got to pick up your cross, you've got to die with me. And that's in a context where he's talking to Jewish people, and even goes out to Gentiles who would be rejected by their culture. Their name is going to be slandered. They're going to be dishonored. And Christ says, you've got to die. You can't expect to keep your honor and follow me in this world. It's not going to happen. And so if you're willing to understand that discipleship means that you die anyway, then trying to protect your ego in a conversation, especially when you're doing it in a sinful manner, should never be done by a Christian. Now, I realize we sin as Christians, but I almost feel like these things are never addressed where people just justify them. They keep on doing it. And they don't realize, again, they're playing into the devil's hands of the devil wants to make you a fool. He doesn't care if you win this argument. Great. You win an argument about whatever, eschatology or something. Terrific. He just wants to make you an idiot, though, in how you argue.
Yeah.
He wants to get you to where you can't argue in a straight line, so that the next time you try to draw that straight line to the truth, you come over to the error instead.
Yeah.
And that's what your ego will do for you. If you raise yourself up in your ego and you try to protect it, then you ultimately will argue like a fool and train yourself to argue and to think through issues like a fool. And you will not come to the ultimate truth that way. You'll be actually turned away from the truth eventually. And he knows he's playing the long game. And that's what that is.
Yeah. One admonition for elders, it is you're going to have bullies, I guess is the best way to describe it, in your congregation are going to argue this way.
Yeah.
And people won't do anything about it. Like they will just ram through the entire congregation like this until you stop them. And sometimes people are like, well, I don't want to do that. I don't want to, again, it's like, it's not my job to stop this, or, that's just them being, this person being that person. That's just their personality. As we've just,
we should do a podcast on pacifism sometime.
Right. And it's like,
that's a form of
God,
it, right?
work it out.
I do want to say though, but again, just to reiterate that sometimes harsh language might even sound harsh, but it's not. Like, for instance, like You know, I heard Gavin say, you know, when we was talking about high church, oh, some people are calling them Antichrist. I'm thinking like, well, we did. and although what we weren't calling high church that, we were calling denominations that, not high church, which I think was a conflation there. But I'm thinking like, well, I mean, possibly did he watch us and see it, or maybe see our title? Who knows? But the point is we didn't call them Antichrist because we believe they're like, you know, everybody thinks the Antichrist is like the beast.
Right.
And
they're not like, of the devil's kingdom.
Right. Antichrist, if anything, Antichrist would be like the false prophet. But our point was that an Antichrist is anyone who replaces Christ or Christ's authority with something else. So the reason why the Reformers called the Pope the Antichrist is not because they thought he was like this like demon out of hell, because he replaced the authority of Christ that Christ had set up in the local congregation. And denominations do the same thing. Christ said, where 2 or 3 are gathered in my name, there am I in their midst. Whatever they bind on heaven or on earth has been bound in heaven. And so that's the authority. So when you say, oh no, there's got to be another person in the middle, that's a replacement of Christ. Christ is there. So now you're in the spot that Christ was supposed to be in. So that's what anti means in the New Testament. It's instead of Christ. It doesn't mean like you're against Christ, even though I would say that's against Christ to do that. But that's what Antichrist is. Someone reads that and they're like, oh, well, that's very harsh, offensive language. And it's like, but if you understand the explanation I just gave, you realize it's not really that harsh of language. It's actually more descriptive than it is. It's not really supposed to be demeaning as much as it's just saying, hey, it's a sin to do it. Stop doing this.
Right.
And we as pastors need to call out sin. Yeah. So that's the point of what, because it was being couched in, oh, well, this is just language that Christians shouldn't use. And it's sort of like, no. I'm not using ad hominem attacks by calling it Antichrist. I'm describing what it is, biblically speaking, when you replace Christ, who's in this spot, and put something else in that spot, and then Christ is in another spot. That's what Antichrist is. So I do think that, like, a lot of times when people say things, we can get offended and think that it's like language shouldn't be used. And we need to get an explanation of should be our constant question. What do you mean by that?
Yeah.
What are you saying? What do you mean? Are you just calling names? Are you actually, trying to say something more profound than that?
That's debating 101, defining terms. What do you actually mean? So I can engage you properly.
Yeah. And just give people the benefit of the doubt or whatever. Now, obviously, sometimes it's clear people are just calling one another names, but I've seen people read into so many others' comments that they were saying something that they never were. And that happens a lot. And you do that when you're afraid that you're going to be dishonored. If you don't care about that, you're not going to read into people's comments.
That's right.
But if you're really concerned about being dishonored, you are. And so really just Christians need to get rid of the ego out of everything, and they'll have great conversations, whether they end up being, harsh sometimes or whatever. It'll all be out of love and a concern for the truth and concern about sin and all of that. And it won't be about, me. I don't want to defend me constantly. That's ridiculous.
All right. So Chrysostom and on the priesthood says, if anyone has a sliver of ego and wants to be a priest, they will eventually turn into a rabid beast that devours the church, because they can't take, because the priest is going to get attacked all the time. Everything you do is going to be criticized, rebuked, like you're this, you're that. And if you have a sliver of ego, you won't hide it for long. And you just got,
your whole ministry is going to be about defending yourself, and you're never going to, and if you're on yourself and not on Jesus, then you're now opposite religion. Now it doesn't matter if you're even correct about yourself. Like you're now preaching a different religion, and you're drawing people toward yourself, and you're wanting people to be on your side and all that sort of thing. And that doesn't work. Yeah.
All right. Well, this was our first episode without April, and we feel it. I'm sure you do too, but she will be back eventually. I don't know. I don't know when. The days that I think she feels good and maybe, has help with the kids, she'll make some appearances and then get back to a regular.
It'll probably be a few months.
Yeah, a few months, but this is the way it'll be for now. But we'll get, like I said, we'll get guests on. Keep supporting us. Keep liking. Keep watching. Keep disliking. And if you want to join our Patreon, that's still possible. We didn't shut that down. With April. Like you said, pray for April, pray for her family, and we'll see you next time. Peace.
Bye-bye.